Welcome back to the BrightWord Books Podcast, where bold ideas meet powerful storytelling. I am your host, and today we're bringing you a special conversation, one that marks the final appearance of the author Brian Oglesby on our show. Over the past episodes, Brian has challenged us to rethink what progress really looks like. His book, Progressives, Leftists, and Black America: How the Leftist Progressive Policies and Causes Have Been Bad for Black America, has sparked a powerful dialogue across political, cultural, and spiritual lines. Today, we're diving into the heart of his message one last time, exploring the roots of his critique, the policies and narratives at play, and the vision he holds for real. Lasting empowerment in Black America. It's a conversation full of depth, clarity, and purpose, and a fitting close to his powerful run on this podcast. Sorry. So let's get into it. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Fine.
Lovely. So I want to start from the very beginning. Let's just get back to the roots. What inspired you to write the book and write the book now? And why do you think it is a conversation that might be urgent to have today?
Well, I think the reason why I wrote the book now is because the United States now, the political environment now is really more tense than it's been in years, maybe than it's ever been for a while. And
Right.
so some people are saying it's more tense than it's been since the Civil War. And so I think the reason why I wrote the book is because, for a few reasons. One reason is because Black Americans are lagging behind a lot of the other immigrant groups who come to the United States. I mean, in business production, in business development, in acquiring advanced degrees at the PhD level in
Right.
mathematics and science and physics. And we're more likely to have structural family problems
Mm.
where kids are growing up without a father in the home, and we're just having so many problems.
Right.
And so I started doing research. I kept some articles that I downloaded off the internet, and I'd been doing this for years. And
Mm.
I'd been listening to guest speakers at Black functions and pastors and
Mm.
authors, and I couldn't really find an answer as to why it was happening. And then I searched in some places that you wouldn't expect to search, and I found some different pieces to the puzzle.
Right.
And so I decided to go ahead and write a book about some of the other pieces that I had found that have been kept quiet or that some people know, but they don't talk about them. And
Right.
some that
Right.
we know about too, but you have to make the connections between the two. I think that's what gave me the incentive to go ahead and write the book.
Mhm. So you
And
see,
that,
it's you've had sort of this almost like an epiphany in your own
yeah,
research, and so
yeah,
you've met this thing, and you're like, well, this actually connected with the other things that I've been
hmm
dealing with. It's sort of functions like a
hmm
centerpiece, and it connected everything, and that's what you're
yeah,
presenting in the book.
yeah. Some different things that came up that I discovered
Hmm.
that aren't really discussed. Yeah, exactly.
And is it uh, the temperature of the things you discovered that made the book for you sort of an urgent thing that needs to be put out as far as the conversation goes? And with it, uh,
Um, I wouldn't say it was the temperature. Okay, yeah, you could sort of say that, but it's because things have been going on for years in the Black community, and it seems like those things are starting to get worse now. They're starting to get a little
right.
worse, and the
Yeah.
racial climate is not getting any better. It looks like it's getting worse. And progressives, they're pitting groups against one another, and
Hmm.
they're making it worse.
Right.
Yeah.
And during this research of yours, I'm very interested. You've so you've had this research and also you've had the writing process. But I'm more interested in the research right now as you because of how you kind of described it. Uh, what or were there any moments to begin with that made you sort of pause and then reconsider your own assumptions? Was that a point that happened during this research?
Yeah, because during the research, I discovered some things that I assumed were correct, and I discovered some other things I didn't know about. And I
Mhm.
discovered some things that I assumed I was wrong about all the time,
Right.
part of the
And
time.
how did you, how was the reception of your book in terms of like different audiences? Pretty much like say like the academics,
Hmm.
academic circles, the grassroots readers. How did you
Hmm.
find that to be different between these communities?
You know what? Not a whole lot of people know about the book yet. I'm trying to get it out there. But the
Right.
way the political climate is now, it really depends on how you're informed. The news
Hmm.
that you watch and what you're seeing around you every day. Sometimes we see news in the United States and the news outlets aren't always reliable. And you look at what you see in real life and what the news media outlets are saying,
Right.
and they're not connecting. There's no connection between the two. So if
Hmm.
you listen to left-leaning news outlets, you're going to get a different viewpoint of the world.
Right.
And if you look at conservative news outlets, because see, in the United States, we have some conservative news outlets and they're on cable TV, you're going to
Right.
get a different outlet, a different view.
Hmm.
You're going to have a different worldview. And it depends on which one you look at the most. And some people go back and forth between conservative and liberal. And so
Right.
you get these different viewpoints. And so it just really depends on how you've been informed and what your background is, what you've been told religiously from home, from other people. And those things get ingrained in you. And it's a combination of things, but especially those 2.
Hmm. Right. I mean, especially when you grow up with these things, and
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
always people who sort of they either grow up left leaning or they grow up right leaning, and that
Hmm.
affects you. Sometimes you have sort of like a rebellion towards that, so you just naturally jump to the other side just because you want to rebellious towards your yeah,
Hmm.
parental figures who
Hmm.
are up. You want to be opposite of, or sometimes you
Hmm.
get for lack of a better word, indoctrinated into those beliefs as well,
Exactly.
although they might not be
Exactly.
something you agree with.
That's good. Exactly. You said hit a nail right on the head. And
Right. Thank you.
our public schools and our universities, you really could go to them sometime for years and really get a first class education. But now at some of them, they're not. Some of those courses are really indoctrinations now in the
Right.
United
Right.
States, and it's really terrible. It's lowering the quality of education, and it depends on. So education is just one area that's
Right.
affecting people negative, and
Mhm.
progressives, they have a lot of influence in the educational system too. And
Right.
interesting, girls are doing a lot better in education
Mm.
and acquiring advanced degrees than men
Right.
are.
The
And
numbers
and
are
and,
there.
and yeah, that's no question because I've been working in the medical field for years, and I
Right.
remember when just about it was a given that 90% of 95% of the time, a doctor was going to be a man. That's not the case anymore in the United
Right.
States. A lot of our doctors are women now,
Okay, you
and
said
lawyers.
the
Yeah, yeah. So the education, the feminist movement kind of
right.
made that happen. It removed a lot of men out of positions of headship and it put women in those positions. So in order to do it, the educational system was one way to do it. So now a lot more of our lawyers are women, a lot more of our senators in Congress, men are Congress women now.
Right. Right. Right.
And yeah.
I mean, and now, uh, what's your view on those people who, like we said, sometimes people are either left or right, but there's sometimes people who bounce. You said they bounce back and forth between those two, and I assume that's
Hmm.
because they find a singular cause that they strongly feel
Mm-hmm.
about, and that particular cause can be associated with one of the two sides, and so they attach
Mm-hmm.
themselves pretty much temporarily just because of that one singular thing.
Mm-hmm.
But because of how things are functioning now, once you relate yourself to one cause from one side, that means
Mm-hmm.
you agree with that whole side, even though you might not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still
Mm-hmm.
the other side views you, oh, you agree with that one thing, then you agree with the other 99 things that comes with it. And you can't really explain yourself to the other side and be like, no, 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 I'm still with you,
Mm-hmm.
kind of with you guys, but I just this one thing. And so since you can't do that, you go, well, I guess I'm just gonna go all in and believe the other 99
Exactly.
things.
Exactly. See, we have some people that are very ultra conservative, and so they're
Hmm.
very right leaning.
Right.
And so they believe pastors of a church should only be a man. Marriage should only be between a man or a woman, and
Hmm.
anything else offends them because that's the way it's been traditionally.
Right.
And then we have some ultra left leaning people that are different, and they say, why, why can't two men be married if that's what they want? And
Right.
why can't a woman be a pastor if she wants?
Right.
And those two people don't agree with each other. And then you have some people that are not ultra conservative. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? But they can
Right.
tolerate, they're moderate, and they can tolerate some things that liberals, that
Right.
progressive think. And then you have some people that are progressive, but they're not all the way left, and they can tolerate some things that conservatives
Right,
believe. And so
right.
they can
They
just,
might be
yeah.
into sort of like more stricter
Mm-hmm.
laws on immigration,
Mm-hmm.
but they're fine
Mm-hmm.
with gay marriage, and sort of like they play
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So you got 80% of the people in a room that can tolerate everybody's views. There's these five,
Right,
it's just 5% over here that are really ultra conservative. And
right,
this
right,
other 5 or 10% that are very ultra left leaning, the two offend each other when they talk to each other a lot.
right,
So they have to be careful what they say about certain things around each other. And now you don't really know where everybody is politically, what end of the
right,
political spectrum, or how far right leaning they are, or how far left leaning they are. If somebody's just a little bit far left leaning than you are, or a little bit farther right leaning, you might offend them about something. And
right,
so you have
right,
to be careful now in this political climate, who you talk to. And so people are afraid to express their political views now.
right.
And
Yeah,
sometimes the religious ones too.
as
It's
well
it,
as sort of the structure of how things are discussed now. I mean, people discuss
mhm,
things on Twitter via tweets, which is
mhm,
limited
mhm.
characters. So
Exactly.
as nuanced as any political view can be, it has to be dumbed down to 140 characters or whatever the number
Hmm.
of characters
Hmm.
you can be. So you can never be nuanced. You can never really explain yourself a little bit more
Nope,
or
you
have sort
can't.
of yeah, any kind
Hmm.
of like idea that is well
Hmm.
explored. You can never have that. And that
Exactly.
that makes people dumber, and also it just makes you think, well, the other side is so stupid because this is what they think. And you summarize the whole political spectrum
And you,
in 140 characters or whatever the number
yeah, and
is.
you generalize
Mhm.
because with a tweet, you can only do, like you said, 150 characters.
Something like
And
that.
so if you got to say one thing or the other, and if people are used to getting their information, a lot of their news from X
Mhm.
or Twitter,
Right. TikTok.
and they're gonna have some skewed views of the
Right.
left if they keep making and the views of the right if they're
Hmm.
left leaning.
Right.
If they keep seeing some patterns in their tweets, you see, if they keep seeing patterns in them, and they
Right.
just go by patterns.
True. And
Hmm.
for better or worse, these people do get into positions of power and start controlling things
Exactly.
and moving things around.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so they will be enacting policies. I
Hmm.
want to ask
Hmm.
you if you have a specific progressive policy that you believe has unintentionally harmed Black communities. And then we'll discuss maybe if there's a better alternative to that. But first, let's focus if there's a policy to begin with that you think of that
Yeah,
way.
there's a few, but one. I think one had its pros and cons, and the one that really I think affects the Black community negatively was the feminist movement, the radical
Right.
feminist movement. See, with the radical feminist movement, some things happened that were terrible. But when the radical feminist movement started, it wasn't it wasn't feminist in it then. They didn't consider themselves feminists.
Hmm.
They called themselves, what did they call themselves? It was the women's liberation movement. It was
Right.
just a women's movement.
Hmm.
And they had some valid causes and they got women some rights because before, if a woman was married, was when she got married, in some cases, her husband took over all her property. And
Right.
yeah, that was the truth in the United States too. And she didn't always have the rights to her property. Her husband could do whatever he wanted to with it. And that's wrong. And women couldn't vote. If a woman went to court, her testimony didn't mean as much. So
Right.
women got those rights, and that was fine for women to get those rights.
Absolutely.
But
Civil
then in the
rights.
night, yeah, there were basic civil rights. That was fine. But
Hmm.
then the civil rights movement, the 60s came.
Right.
And then this other group of people came on board and they called themselves feminists. And they had some different demands from society than the first wave of the feminism when they were just when it was just a women's liberation movement.
Hmm.
They wanted headship of women in areas like medicine and science. They wanted women to be the CEOs of corporations if they're 50% of the country's population. Why, how come up to 50% of them aren't CEOs of companies? Yeah, that was the way some of them felt. They were
Right.
very, very radical. They were very radical. It was different from the Judeo Christian ethic that the United States had years ago. And women basically, and women basic the husband was basically the head of the household.
Right.
And the men basically had headship in society. And women didn't do things like go in the army. They didn't do that in the United States years ago.
Right.
But now we have a women's Army Corps. And one thing about that movement was Planned Parenthood and abortion. When that happened, there was a woman called Margaret Sanger, and she came around the 1950s, and she was a radical feminist. She was also a socialist. She was a Marxist too.
Mm.
And so she went to Germany and she talked to some of Adolf Hitler's ministers of racial hygiene, because some of them were still alive in the 1950s. They hadn't all
Mm.
died of old age. And she found out what did they do to exterminate so many Jews in Nazi Germany. And so she liked it, what they did, their whole system and everything. And she praised their system. And she wanted to implement it for African Americans because of the high fertility of the race. And some people are just inferior. And so we need to cultivate our garden. So Black
Hmm.
people are inferior. And she was a feminist. She was a radical feminist. And what happened with her is, since she was a feminist, what happened was she started her Planned Parenthood clinics all over the country. And that one area, abortion, as a result of that one area, Black babies were a lot more likely to be aborted before they were born. See, Black
Mm.
people are only 12 or 13% of the population, but they're a third of all the abortions. So half of all Black babies that have ever been conceived were aborted.
Right.
And that was because of that one radical feminist policy, abortion.
Right. And do you
See, that
think
hurt.
what about so as far as these policies go, do you think policies can be created with any sort of good intention, but there is a poor understanding of cultural and community dynamics?
Yeah, they can. Some of them can, but
Some of them.
some policies can be good. Like, for example, one policy that we have a group in the United States. and
Hmm.
they're a civil rights group. They're called the NAACP. They're the
Right.
National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They've been around since 1905. So they've been around a long time. They've been in the business
Wow.
for a long time. And so what happened was there was a debate that went on years ago. It
Hmm.
was between two, I would say, icons of leadership in the Black community. One of
Hmm.
them was W.E.B. Du Bois, and one was Booker T. Washington. And so they were split on which direction they think the Black community should go, whether they should
Right.
integrate with whites or whether they should not, just stay kind of separate
Hmm.
and form communities of their own. Well, there were some advantages to both, actually, because I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to Chicago every summer. And so I went back up there in 2014. And the last time I'd been there was in 96. My cousin graduated from the police academy in
Right.
96 and was at Navy Pier. And so I was in a suburb of Chicago in Schaumburg, Illinois. I went to a workshop and I said, I want to see what Chicago looks like. Those places I hadn't been to in years. So I drove down to the lakefront and I drove to the Loop and all those shops on Michigan Avenue and Lakeshore
Right.
Drive. And on the way through, I drove through the Hispanic community. It was a community called the Little Village community.
Hmm.
And when I was there, I could see a lot of their ethnic shops, their ethnic restaurants, the
Right.
bodega, the little grocery stores that they have. And I think maybe I saw some car lots used, maybe a new one. I saw some savings and loans. I saw banks. I saw maybe a PC repair shop and a
Right.
lot of the businesses, the hardware store, and all of them had Hispanic names. And
Right.
you roll down your window and you hear the mariachi music. That's obviously, it was Mexican. That
Right.
community was put together by Mexican Americans. And then you drive down the street and you see these bright colored murals on some of the buildings. And they kind of remind you maybe of some place like Mexico City. I
Right.
guess maybe Guatemala or Honduras. But I saw the Mexican influence. And see, those communities, they give a community jobs and opportunity. See, and they provide a tax base for a big city like Chicago.
Right.
And when you can do that, see, they were doing that as a community. And with integration, that was one thing we lost. We lost our ethnic communities. You never see that in the Black community. But one pro that came out of it is we got a chance to work in some industries where only whites would have had those industries going, like a
Right.
pharmaceutical sales rep, or maybe someplace, something like um, maybe a highway that has to be built all the way across the country, like
Hmm.
engineers and environmental engineers and architects. For that, the Black community may not have had a reason for that. And so integration was a pro. We got a chance to work in some of those fields. So so some things, policies have their pros and cons to them too.
Right.
And
But I mean, what you've presented um, can be some critics would say, well, your views they risk dividing the community or maybe even give ammunition to political opponents. How would you respond to that?
that it could give ammunition to political opponents.
Right, in the sense that, well, you're saying, well, here's a black gentleman asking for separation, and there
Mm-hmm.
might be, would in a sense, well, white people have separated themselves from black people for a while,
Mm-hmm.
right? And slavery ended, but it
Mm-hmm.
didn't really end because there was still a form of separation that puts
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
black people
Mm-hmm.
beneath
Mm-hmm.
white people for a while.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
assassinated every black sort of speaker, motivator, revolutionist,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. A lot of them, yeah,
A lot
some
of
of them
them,
were.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was in so many words, or if you in one words, segregation at its finest. And
Yeah.
so and so that's when white people thought, well, we should keep black people away from us.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're saying not the same thing, but you're saying that maybe we should separate ourselves from them. And in that sense, you're kind of saying the same thing as the white person said, but you're saying it from a place of, well, this might help my community, but they're saying it because um they view black people as beneath them. It's not coming from the
Mm-hmm.
same place, but it's sort of the same sentence. And because of that, it can be used by political opponents
Yeah,
who
it
think
can.
you're coming from the same place that those
Mm-hmm.
other people are with the bad
Mm-hmm.
intentions. I
Yeah.
hope that makes sense.
Yeah. But you see, what I'm saying is since integration, since the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 67 and 68 was signed,
Hmm.
and people had the right to live wherever they wanted to, be wherever they want to be. And we have some completely integrated neighborhoods.
Right.
But what happened is by choice, people, we still are pretty segregated in
Hmm.
the United States. In a
Sure.
lot of ways, we still have the Black neighborhood over here. And then you
Hmm.
have a lot of
The
Hispanics living
projects.
here. Yep,
Right.
and you have a lot of whites that are living
Hmm.
here. And you
In the
have
nice
these
communities.
places. Yeah, you do. You have these little ethnic communities. And we still have some Chinatowns and some Koreatowns and
Right. Right.
Japantowns because we have a lot of Asians
The Irish,
Irish, yeah. And see now,
Italian. Hmm.
uh-huh. And see what happened was now the Arab community is growing in the United
Right.
States now. So Dearborn, Michigan, it's just about all Arab now. It's mostly Arab. And Los Angeles, they got Little Arabia. And those
Hmm.
communities, they give people some leverage and
Right.
some network. You know what I mean? And it's not really the best thing to have. Ideally, you want a place where everybody can live and work next to each other and there's no separate
Right.
communities.
Hmm.
But if we're going to have these separate communities and if they're a benefit to everybody,
Hmm.
Black people, we don't have the business community. Like I just explained with the Hispanics. And
Yes.
if there's any, if it was going to come to this, we could have just kept our ethnic communities and
Hmm.
went with partial integration. Because in some places everybody's got to work together to make America work. And that's kind of what
Right.
we got right now. It's kind of what we got right now. And if you pay it might have been better if Black people, like Hispanics and some of the other groups, had just played a balancing act.
Right.
That might
Right.
have been better instead of just trying to completely integrate with whites. And we lost all those because Hispanics, they did the balancing act. And to a greater or lesser extent, Asians did too.
Right.
That may have been better,
Right.
but we don't live in an ideal world, unfortunately.
So what you're saying is it would have been more, if I understand you correctly, you think ideally it would have been sort of a community that lands in America, right? And they put
Mm-hmm.
themselves in a place where they say, well, this is sort of this is our communal space for our
Mm-hmm.
community, for our the members
Mm-hmm.
of our community, and
Mm-hmm.
we're lifting each other through business. We're opening
Mm-hmm.
shops, we're providing jobs, we're helping
Mm-hmm.
each other, we're lifting each other, members from our community, because we're living next to each other. Everyone is
Mm-hmm.
neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And should someone from a different culture would like to join us, come through, just pass through and explore
Mm-hmm.
the shops or interact with the
Mm-hmm.
culture or even
Mm-hmm.
live there. You would have a black guy living in a Hispanic community. That's fine. Nobody's going to treat him badly or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And be sort of a participant into this community. But let's not
Mm-hmm.
forget what is expansion is about. It is about creating a community that keeps on growing with us as we provide jobs
Mm-hmm.
for each other. And so
Mm-hmm.
the community is now integrated with the United States because it's powering the economy, it's making
Mm-hmm.
money, it's doing all the things that it should
Mm-hmm.
do. There's no
Mm-hmm.
crime, there's none of that. But at the same time, it's keeping its ethnic roots to itself. It's keeping
Mm-hmm.
cuisine. It's keeping the culture. There might be some
Mm-hmm.
days or
Mm-hmm.
festivals that are
Mm-hmm.
celebrated within that community. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, while being open to other cultures. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Should be ideal?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. See, ideally, you don't really want to have those separate communities. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Ideally, you want to have a place where everybody's just American, and you
Right.
don't have what the Hispanic community was called. It was called the village. It was called
Right.
the village. And if you have these little villages and people get too isolated, that's
Hmm.
not good either.
Right.
And so ideally, you don't really want to have any of them, really. But since
Right.
we're segregated and other communities, groups of people, they have networks, they have
Right.
robust networks among people like them. And the Black
Hmm.
community, we don't really have those networks. We're a dependent group. We're a more
Right.
dependent group on white businesses, on their businesses, their mom and pop businesses, their
Right.
big chain businesses.
Hmm.
And sometimes the Arabs and the Asians, I see Black people working in some of their shops too, because we're so
Right.
dependent on
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 another.
everybody else. When you're
Right.
that
Right.
dependent, you can't produce anything. You can't produce any jobs. And but all those other people have their ethnic communities, and they keep some of their money in their community so
Hmm.
they build some wealth, and they can do that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Create
And
generational wealth.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And with the Black community, we don't have that ability
Right.
because of progressive causes.
And how do you think this message should be spread? Like, how have mainstream media platforms, do you think, contributed to um, reinforcing progressive narratives, maybe in the Black community or otherwise?
Um, I'm not exactly sure. I'm know what you're
What do
talking
you
about.
let's break it down. So, first of all, how do you think this message should be spread?
Okay, that people should not be that we shouldn't have these progressive causes, or that people shouldn't segregate themselves,
Hmm.
or kind of both.
And
But okay, I think about people not segregating themselves so much. I think people kind of know it's wrong to do it. It's probably ideally better that everybody lives together, but
right.
people are used to what they're used to. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
People are used to what they're used to. It is just human nature. And so
Right.
people tend to gravitate toward people like them. You know what I mean?
Right. I understand what you're saying.
Understand
And
each
so
other.
I understand each other. The
Hmm.
thing is, we kind of touched on this before, so I wanted to bring it back because you said we were talking about sort of just left-leaning TV, right-leaning TV, red TV,
Hmm.
blue TV,
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it. How do you think these platforms contributed to reinforcing any narratives that come, any progressive narratives
Hmm.
that come in to the Black community?
Because, okay, we have some media outlets
Hmm.
that are really progressive and they're really left leaning. They reinforce police brutality on Black people. And it
Right.
happens sometimes, but what they don't admit is that twice as many white people are murdered by the police than Black people, but there are 5 times as many whites as there are Blacks.
Hmm.
So Black people are still 2 times as likely to be killed by the police, but that's a
Right.
lot of white people. See, they don't really, they want to keep you focused on police brutality against Black people, because
Right.
to be honest with you, our media outlets like CNN and MSNBC, a lot of those people, they're connected to the left. And the left, they
Hmm.
have connections with Marxism and socialism. And what they want to do is march through all the institutions and call them racist so they can discredit the United States altogether and get rid of it.
Right.
But they have their interests. See, they have their interests, and then that doesn't mean that necessarily they have Black people's interests either. But
Right.
that's what they do because they have their interests. It's not good for the country either. And the news
Right.
outlets do it. They showed pictures of statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. They were the first and second presidents of the United States, but people were throwing paint bombs at them, and they had these little objects. I don't know if they were what they were baseball bats or what, but they were hitting on them and they were calling them racist because they had slaves. Well,
Right.
yeah, they did, but that was years ago, and America was different then.
Hmm.
Now, Black people can really enjoy the benefits of a constitutional republic with the free market and capitalism. See, we can really enjoy that now. And if you dwell on that all the time, you're not going to ever get past that.
Right.
You see
What
what I
I
mean? And the media want to keep you focused on things like that. And that's a skewed focus to keep people, that's bad to keep people focused on things like that. It just
right. And
it shapes their worldview in a bad way, in a wrong way.
hmm
It
hmm
makes them hate their country and everything.
right. I understand what you're saying. So what and this is where we come to independent media and
Mm-hmm.
more to
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about independent Black media. How do
Mm-hmm.
you, what role do you think, say, the independent Black media and podcasts like this one, um, what role do you think they play in reshaping political conversation?
They can play a big role. They can play a big role. But most of the Black media outlets, there aren't very
Hmm.
many of them left. And the ones that are, they got so many strings attached to them by progressives, by leftists,
Right.
like a lot of our politicians do. And they're not going to really introduce a lot of narratives like that. They're going to keep introducing narratives that make Black people feel like victims.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they're going to feel that they've been wronged all the time. And they're still being wronged. And it's going to keep them from forming communities that they need to practice group economics and really bring themselves out of this. But for that, you need a free market with capitalism and a constitutional republic. See, you
Right.
can't have socialism for that. That's different. Because see,
Right.
with
And
that, the government, with socialism, and communism, the government controls the economy of the country. They basically control it. But with what we got now, you can have local control over it, and communities can do a lot to bring themselves up out of poverty. And I think,
hmm
and then they can inform themselves better about things and educate themselves and really make themselves better off.
right.
You see, mm-hmm.
You also touch on the erosion of family structure
Yeah,
and
yeah,
faith in some Black communities. So what's the
yeah.
connection between those shifts and progressive ideologies, in your opinion? What do you think?
I think the feminist move, okay, first, let me start with integration. With
Hmm.
integration, when we integrated, the progressive, some progressives hated integration. They didn't want it
Hmm.
at first. And the NAACP and those progressives to start the NAACP, they kind of pushed for integration. I mean, they sued corporations and things because they wouldn't hire Black people. Because they said they wanted them to hire Black people, a certain amount of them. When you hire them, you can't just hire them. You have to
Hmm.
give them promotions with experience, work experience, and education. And some Black people were not allowed to live in certain places, and the NAACP sued for them to live in those places. But what they
Hmm.
didn't do was what Booker T. Washington did, endorse a strong Black business community where
Right.
people could cast their buckets down on their and build strong Black communities of their own and practice
Hmm.
group economics and build them a community. Because you see, the founders of the NAACP, the first three presidents were white, and at least two of them were socialists. So you see, they made sure that organization didn't morph into anything that would really help Black people get out of the situation that they're in, and they're leftists. Right now, those people will be considered leftists. They're very
Hmm.
left-leaning. And so the feminist movement, how it comes in, since those communities didn't happen, like the little village community I was talking about, the Hispanics,
Right.
you have these pockets in the Black community. It's not everywhere in the Black community. It's just these little pockets, in a
Hmm.
greater Black community where you got a lot of boarded up houses and vacant lots and you got
Right.
burnt out houses and there's just no opportunity. And you see gang graffiti over some of the walls. Then you hear
Hmm.
gunshots going off at night in some of those communities. And you got drug dealers and everything, and you prostitutes in those little sectors of that.
Right.
And that's not most Black people, it's just some. In those places, it was better for the women to take benefits from feminism because the feminists lobbied on Congress for single moms to be able to raise children on
Hmm.
WIC and SSI and food stamps and Section 8 housing. And if the
Right.
women make too much money, they get none of those benefits and they can't have a husband in the house. For some of those women in those pockets in the Black community, it was better if they lived off of the things that progressives set up for them.
Right.
And so what happens when the schools are terrible in those areas because the Democrat Party runs those areas and the progressives got a lot of control over them. They move out of those neighborhoods and they move to other Black neighborhoods where the people are doing better. And then they start having crime. But you see, kids that are raised without a father in the home from those areas, they're more likely to go to jail, they're more likely to go to prison, they're more likely to
Mhm.
drop out of high school and have all kinds of other emotional problems, really
Right.
bad emotional problems. And you see, the educational system came in and the feminization of it was a progressive thing. And Black men lag a lot farther behind their female counterparts as a group than other groups do. The men
Right.
are doing a little better in the other groups. The Hispanic men are doing a little better compared with their women. White men are doing better compared with their
Hmm.
women. Black men, there's this big gap between Black women that are getting college degrees and Black men.
Right.
And so that's that's how some progressive causes are
Right. And
destroying the community.
it seems like you put a lot on personal accountability.
Yeah, that's
And
true too.
yeah. Well, some
Hmm.
people say that they view the whole thing, tradition and personal accountability as a whole, as quote unquote conservative dog whistles. What do you think about
Hmm.
that?
Yeah, I think personal accountability, yeah, it's conservative. That's
Hmm.
more a conservative thing because the way progressives have us going, if we're dependent on government and outside things like jobs from other people's communities,
Right.
then as a community, you're not uplifting yourself.
Hmm.
You're dependent on other groups and on other things. And if you take personal responsibility and talk to other people in your community and say this is what needs to be done, and you get together and do it, then that's personal accountability. And we have some Blacks that have done that, attempted to, but it's just in the Black community. If you want to get involved in politics for
Right.
so long, you had to be a Democrat. And the
Hmm.
Democrats they're just not effective at pulling the Black community out of it. But that's the way Black people voted 95% of the time for the past 50 or 60 years.
Right.
So yeah.
So what can be effective? If you had a platform to implement one national policy today that could empower Black Americans long term, what would it be?
Um, some things can't just be policies. One thing is we need to get the fathers back in the home. A lot
Right.
of these kids, they need to have a mother and father. So many
Hmm.
of these kids don't have a father. So that's one thing we need to do. If we just get
Right.
fathers back in the homes, that'll change a lot. The kids will do a lot better. They'll be a lot more successful. And number two, I think what we need to do is to do what those Black people did in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Mhm.
have a Black community where our money stays in the community and we can develop and you can generate wealth with that money and you can put a lot of people to work in your community
Right.
for the Black, I mean, as a community, for the Black community, those would be two things that we could really do.
Right. And do you think sort of breaking out of the two party binary would be beneficial for what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think it would. I think it would because the Democrat Party is a party
Hmm.
that Black people voted for sometimes 95% of the times. You can go and Black people have voted. I know they have. They voted a straight
Right.
Democrat ticket. They didn't even know what the
Who's campaigning?
they didn't know who was campaigning. They didn't know the point behind his campaign.
Right. Or
But
his
they saw a
policies or
Democrat
whatever.
and a Republican, they
Mm.
voted for the Democrat. But now I think that's slowly changing
Hmm.
because Black people are voting. Because when President Trump ran, about 24% of Black people voted for him, and a
Hmm.
lot of men, but not women. They tended to wanted to vote for Kamala Harris
Right.
because they thought she was Black. But Black men didn't. A lot more of them voted for Donald Trump. And I
Hmm.
think Black people are slowly changing and they're leaving the Democrat Party. So,
Right.
yeah, if we switched up with parties and
Hmm.
political affiliations, it would
Right.
make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
So political liberation in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah. That would
Yeah.
make a
And
difference.
will make a difference. And to continue making a difference, where do you hope
Mhm.
this conversation goes next? I mean, just for, and also, how can our listeners be part of this momentum?
Um, let me see. Our listeners, um, I think to make this for the people need to sit down
Mhm.
and discuss. You see, because America has come to something else different now, and
Right.
we're still pretty segregated.
Mhm.
You see, the country is still pretty segregated because for certain things we can segregate, and for certain things we can integrate. Because I go to work, and we had ethnic day at work, and we had so many different types of food at work because people can come together in a workplace. If they got to make money, they can tolerate the other group of people, but
Right.
they go back home and their neighborhoods are segregated. I go to church on Sunday, and the church is 98% Black. So, and that's the case for everybody. So we
Right.
need to sit down and discuss things, and everybody has some common denominators that we're going to all agree with or not agree with that's done and it's
Hmm.
not done if we're going to all come together and live together as a group of people, as Americans,
Hmm.
because you see,
Right.
that's possible. But if we have to have these little pockets where everybody is separate at, and that's only going to be about 10 or 20% of society. The rest of society, people are integrated if they have to. But
Right.
if we
Right.
have to have these separate little places where you have setups like the little village community that the Hispanics have, well,
Hmm.
then Black people need to have one too, if that's what everybody insists on.
Right.
But if not, then we need to get together and sit down and discuss ways that we can live and work together and what offends other groups and what doesn't. And do you mind this or don't you? And some
Hmm.
people, certain things, whether you like it or not, you're going to stop doing them
Right.
or stop saying those things so everybody can live together and not be offended,
Right.
you know.
Right. Hmm. Right.
And
I mean,
those things are cultural and ethnic too. Some of them are political,
right.
and,
Yeah.
and
I
some.
mean,
Mhm. Yeah.
History plays a role into it, culture
Hmm.
plays a role
Hmm.
into it,
Hmm.
politics
Yeah.
plays a role into it,
Yeah, it
but
does.
they are all
It
things, they
does.
are all ideas. They are all in our heads, and if we can just sit down and talk about them,
Hmm.
we might actually reach
And
a
discuss
beneficial
them.
conclusion.
We could come up with some solutions for some of them.
Right,
But
right.
people are used to what they're used to, and people
Hmm.
just express themselves differently, and we might not understand how the other person expresses the other himself. And but if we sit down and talk and really get used to each other, we could
Right.
probably come up with some solutions, you know, about
Hmm.
how to make this work together with everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you've heard it here, folks. And with that, we conclude our final conversation here with Brian Oglesby, here on the BrightWord Books Podcast. His book, Progressives, Leftists, and Black America, continues to make waves. And whether you agree with him or not, his voice has sparked a necessary reflection and debate. Brian reminded us that progress isn't just about moving forward. It's about making sure that we are headed in the right direction. His challenge to think critically, to value accountability, and to re-examine long-held beliefs is one that stays with us long after this conversation ends. To Brian, thank you so much for your honesty, I mean, for your courage, and to your commitment to the truth as you see it for yourself. And to our listeners, thank you for walking this journey with us. Stay tuned with more authors coming and more bold perspectives and more conversations that matter. Brian, I want to thank you again, and I'll say to you goodbye.
Thank you. It was an honor to be on your show.
It was an honor talking to you. Everyone, this is the BrightWord Books podcast. Until next time, keep turning bright words into bold actions. Goodbye.